එකම ඇත්ත. For the people, by the people, with the people.
TV1 රැස්විහිදෙන ජීවිතේ.
තනිව යන්න බෑයි කියන කාරණේද අධ්‍යාපනයේදී
මම කියන්නේ ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් සිදු වෙන දේ.
අපිට රුසියානු සපත්තුව මේ ලංකාවට දාන්න බෑ ඒක ලොකුයි. චීන සපත්තුව සීන සමාජවාදී ඒකත් හරියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒක මේ කකුලට පොඩි. අපි අපේම සපත්තුව මහ ගන්න ඕනේ කියලා.
එක්සත් ජාතීන්ගේ මානව හිමිකම් කවුන්සිලය කියලා කියන්නේ මානව හිමිකම් පිළිබඳව ලෝක පාර්ලිමේන්තුව.
අපි පරිසරය ගැන දෙකක් තිබුණා.
මම ඉස්කෝලේ යන කාලෙත් මේක තුන්වන ලෝකේ රටක්. දැන් මම මැරෙන්න යන කාලෙදිත් තුන්වන ලෝකේ රටක්.
ආණ්ඩුව රූපාන්තරණය වෙනවා රාජ්‍ය බවට.
එත දෙකේ එත පහේදී තමයි මේ වතු ඔක්කොම නැෂනලයිස් කරේ.
එහෙමයි ධර්මශ්‍රී රට ගැන විතරක් නෙමෙයි මම ගැනත් මම බය වෙලා ඉන්නේ.
අපනයන කවුද කරන්නේ? කවුද විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයට ගියේ? කවුද අපේ ව්‍යාපාර කරන්නේ? විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයට ගියේ?
The greatest glory in living lies not in never failing, but in rising every time we fall. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. We're coming to you live from the Newsfirst Center in Colombo. Our topic of discussion today is Sri Lanka economically crawling towards a dungeon? To discuss all this and more, we've invited 4 guests to our studio this evening as well. Joining us this evening on Face the Nation are Dr. Sarath Rajapatrana, Chair, Academic Program, Advocata Institute; Dr. Belisha Veeraratna, Research Fellow, Institute of Policy Studies; Dr. Priyanka Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer of Economics, University of Colombo; and also Daniel Alfonsos, former advisor to the Ministry of Finance. Let's start off tonight's show with Dr. Sarath Rajapatrana, Chair, Academic Programs, Advocata Institute. Dr. Rajapatrana, why are we in this crisis at present? Are we in a crisis really? Your time starts now.
I think we are in a crisis. There's no denying that. If you look at the numbers, as we were doing before we started, we are in a crisis in the sense that we cannot ignore it. Okay, so if we don't address the issues that are before us, then crisis will get worse, not better, unless we design a program of relief, design a program of action to deal with the main issues that have come up which constitute the crisis. So that is the challenge. I don't know about dungeon, but we are in a crisis in the sense that we cannot continue to have this situation.
Dr. Rajapatrana, now you are saying that we are in a crisis at the moment. However, the governor of the central bank does not seem to be thinking so, because a few days ago he said that the IMF is not the only solution that the Sri Lankan government is looking at, and that the IMF does not have a magic wand. Henceforth, we still have an avenue open as far as restructuring the country's economy, restructuring our debt is concerned. What is the government policy?
That's what I'm trying to understand.
You don't know.
I'm very surprised that the governor says that it is not a solution, because we have gone to them for 16 times. All the 16 times, some of the people in the central bank said they have not been able to help us. Actually, they did help us. We didn't follow through some of the programs. Out of the 16 programs, about 5 of them, if I remember correctly, didn't work out, in the sense that we were not able to meet some of the criteria that was set up for us to get out of the situation. So I don't think that we can restructure at a cost to ourselves. But the most important thing that the IMF will give us is not the money as much as the confidence that our potential lenders and current lenders can have that we have an organized program of dealing with the situation now. What is the situation? We have low growth, right? We have very high debt. We are running around trying to collect money in order to pay that part of it at least. And so that is a crisis situation. And we have not been in this situation, I think, since 1970-77 period.
So, Dr. Rajapatran, because you spoke about the 1970 to 1977 period, during the time of Herbert Tennecoon as the governor of the central bank from 1971 to 1979, that's the period in which Herbert Tennecoon was the governor of the central bank. Now, even during this time, the governor was not able to resurrect the country's economy. As a result of that, the government in play had a bad loss at the general elections, and the UNP government came into play. And in 1977, as you are very well aware, there was a change of thinking, a change of status quo, and henceforth the country's economy again started booming. What is the difference you see from individuals like Herbert Tennecoon and the current governor who is sitting as the governor of the central bank?
Actually, I don't want to be comparing governors. I mean, that's not the story. The story is that when the 70 to 77 period, there was a new ideology. That ideology that was brought in by very good people like Dr. N. Empera, Dr. Olna de Silva, Peter
That
Kane.
ideology failed.
No, that's exactly what I'm going to tell you.
Right.
It failed. It has to fail because it has not succeeded anywhere else. When it succeeded in Soviet Union, they failed hugely, with the collapse of the whole regime. So it is not a governor so much as that. At that time, the central bank was a very serious, important, respected institution, and it was an issue of running monetary policy that was favoring the economy in a way to get out of the low sort of growth rate it has fallen to. So there was a huge sort of a change between 70 and 77. We increased huge import restrictions. Somebody compared Sri Lanka at that time with the problems that the type of import control that Russia was having at the time. Our exports were not doing very well. Of course, partly it's an international environment also. So they came out with it. The thing that we have to say, they came out and they did very well. So 77 to say at the 8 years to it, we did very well. And so we came out of it because we followed good policies, increased incentives, balanced the budget, did those things.
Dr. Rajapatran, you've been with the World Bank for nearly 30 years, since 1975. You had a very good track record handling affairs for the World Bank at that time. Have you ever seen a country this dictatorial, this arrogant, as far as coming out of an economic crisis of this nature?
I don't like the characterization. They are more like personal, right? But I think that they are, what is the word? Overconfidence. Is the Laurentian term, cocksure about what they are doing. But we from outside don't see that this is going to take us very far. So in other words, we take money from here and give it there. Where's the program that is going to revive the economy? What has happened to the growth rate? What's happened to the poverty, the rate of poverty in the economy? What has happened to income distribution? All those things are numbers that give us concern. So I don't see a program in place by the people who are in power now that is trying to get us out of this hole that we have got into.
Dr. Rajapatran, every single time we interview economists, they always show a bleak picture of the country's economy. But Sri Lanka has been thus far very resilient to all the aftershocks that we've experienced thus far. I can give you a classic example. By the 15th of December last year, our reserves was at 1.5 billion. the governor of the central bank pulled a rabbit out of the hat and was able to increase that number to 3.1 billion. Now there is discussions with the Indian government to bring in another 1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Cumulatively, it would be 4.6 billion. Now, no one is talking about the positives of the government. They've been able to do something, aren't they?
Yeah,
haven't they been able to do that?
Yeah, actually, repaying the debt, there's an issue that we have written about it last week, is that there's a priority. Are we going to about 500 million? Are we going to have money to import milk foods, medicines and other things that are essentials, or are we going to pay off our debts that we had got from our bonds? Okay, so there's always a choice, and some of us, actually it turns out that all four of us who spoke, we didn't, only one person I talked to only with my colleague Dr. Roshan Pera. Others independently came with the same view that we had to give some priority to deal with the immediate problem, and we can restructure the debt in a way that we can talk to the IMF. We have better chances if you went to the IMF, because our lenders, the potential lenders also, we will know we are serious about getting out of this. And as so far, we have not seen a viable program in place in order to go past this situation.
It seems to me, for some reason, Dr. Rajapatrana, that when economists come into action and make remarks, make statements, they are all against the government. This sentiment was even echoed by the governor of the central bank, saying those who said initially that we won't be able to pay the ISBs, now when we are ready to pay the ISBs, are saying don't pay it or restructure the debt. Are you also one of them?
No, I don't agree with the characterization all economists are against the government. No.
No, this is not what I'm saying, Dr. Rajbal. This is what the governor of the central bank is of the view.
So he can say it. I'm sure he is a free country. He can say it.
I am not saying anything of this sort.
Yeah, you don't have to. I'm not characterizing what he says. He has to say these things are the governor of the bank. That's his job. I don't have any problem with that.
Doesn't he have a point there?
Meaning?
Meaning that when they were saying that they want to pay it, most of the economists or the business leaders said that the government will not be able to pay it. When the government was getting ready to pay that $500 million tomorrow, that is on the 18th of January, then they said, now don't pay it, restructure the debt. Now that's not fair, Dr. Rajapatrana. Is it fair?
No, we are fair by the people. We are fair by the increase in poverty. We are fair by the rate of unemployment that has increased. We are fair by the children who need milk food. You can see the queues that are there in front of us when we get down to the main street. That is what we see. So I judge economic policy the way how it impacts on the population, our people. And so on that criterion, we are back again. Just because we took money from here and put it there, doesn't mean to say that's a solution. I see a solution when the economy is growing. I see a solution when poverty rates are declining. I see a solution when the availability of milk food for children are there. Before that happens, I can say that is not a thing that...
the governor of the central bank is saying, Dr. Rajapatrana, that economic growth this year would be around 5.5%.
Let's see. It's not fair to
12
say.
months from now, we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen at that time at least.
So we can have another chat
then. We'll have food to eat at that time. So that's a big question mark anyway.
Yeah.
So you don't see a glimmer of hope at the end of this tunnel. Are you seeing we falling to an abyss?
Not at all. I'm saying I have seen countries all over the place in worse situation than this, getting up and doing reforms, getting IMF and other help, and having a program of revival of the economy. That is exactly what I'm not seeing here today.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajapatrana. You said something very clear. You said that you've seen countries who've been in worse situations than Sri Lanka at present.
Yeah.
However, you mentioned that all these countries have gone to the IMF, restructured their debt and come out of this situation quite formidably. Do you think that is the equation that is not there with this central bank, or at least the government, the IMF?
It is one of the things. The thing is this, what I don't understand, and I don't understand when it is available. When that facility is available, we have every right to go to the IMF because we are members of that organization since 1950, since the central bank was created, right? One. Two is that there was an emergency assistance given by the by the IMF, that is no conditions, right? Twice your quota in assistance at interest rates that are much more attractive than the commercial rate. Why didn't we take it?
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Rajapathrana. Will speak to you more in length as the show goes on. I promise you on that. I want to pick Dr. Bilisha Veeratna, Research Fellow, Institute of Policy Studies. Your brain now, Dr. Bilisha. Why are economists so negative about the country's economy? I'll talk about that in a bit, but I want to speak about a bit of numbers that affects the foreign reserves in Sri Lanka, which is work remittances. Now, November saw an all-time low, 12-year all-time low of 271.4 million. The number as far as migrant work remittances were concerned. However, the government was able to maneuver somewhat and was able to increase this number to 325.2 million US dollars. Isn't this an achievement in the eyes of the government as far as cushioning the foreign reserves in the country?
Your numbers are correct, Shamil. It did go up from 271 to 325 million in December, but however, I don't know.
Good news.
Good news in some way, but not
bad news. Why?
But not all good news, because when we got 325 this year, I mean December 2021, the previous year, December 2020, we got over 800 million US dollars. So that was huge. That was just as the pandemic hit.
So we're looking at a 60% drop compared to 2020, 2021.
Drop, yes. And then the other thing is, who has to take credit for this little increase from 271 to 325? Because this was December, not just another month. December is the season, and it's called, remittances are highly seasonal. And December has traditionally been the month that attracts the highest number of remittances in any given year. And when you look from 2009 onwards, what we got last year in December is one of the lowest monthly remittances in December. So you can hardly consider it as an achievement when you compare compare apples to apples. When you compare to other December months, it is not at all significant. But when you compare to November, of course it might be, because if you look at the trend in remittances, since last January, monthly remittances have been going down. And then I was saying this even before December came, that December remittances are going to go up, but please don't take credit for it, because this is people are sending money to their families, not because of the 2 rupee or the 10 rupee. People want their families to kind of have a little bit more during the season, and there were other issues also in the country. So we know that remittances are also counter-cyclical. So there was a lot of other issues going on. There was a lot of economic difficulty. So to cushion those things also, remittances came. So it was more, my point of view is it was more of a micro-level decision where people, individual migrant workers or other well-wishers overseas sent a little bit more this in December compared to November, but December didn't perform all that good at all.
Bilisha, the government also provided an incentive of 10 additional rupees for every dollar converted into rupees in addition to the normal exchange rate as well. So don't you think this action, which was done with a magic wand by the governor of the central bank, didn't this contribute to the increase in the number?
Now we have to understand that remittances come in so many ways, and coming through banks and getting 10 rupees extra is one of those ways. People can hand carry money when they're coming back, and they can send via all these informal channels. So then you know, there are black markets, there are curb markets, there are various ways of where you can exchange the foreign currency. And during this critical time in Sri Lanka, there were various exchange rates going around in Sri Lanka. So the formal exchange rate was fixed around 198 to 202 or 203. But there were places where you could have gotten 240 rupees per US dollar when there was only 202. So there was a lot of incentive for remittances to come along other ways. So it was a very dynamic environment with many controls. There was more way for black markets.
So I'm trying to figure out, Dr. Belisha, now last year the number stood at over 800 million US dollars as far as December was concerned. This year the number dropped to 325.2 million US dollars. Now there is a significant gap here, approximately around 60% drop as far as 2020 and 2021 is concerned. So are you trying to tell me that this money came to Sri Lanka via informal channels, however the government was not able to capitalize it because they had a peg on the US dollar?
Possibly, that is part of the story also, Shamil. So now some people who were able to send through these alternative channels would have sent it like Hundial or Havala or various other informal channels. So then they are not recorded in the traditional monthly remittances that the central bank reports. So it would have come and benefited. But then there was also a lot of rhetoric, and I've heard personal comments by migrant workers during my field work that we will never send to Sri Lanka during this time. This is hideous and we are not benefiting. Some of these people, we have to understand, they might have a bank account in another country. So they would have sent it there instead of sending it to Sri Lanka, because sometimes you don't necessarily have to send if you don't have your family here. And if you're only sending it as savings, you don't have to send it to Sri Lanka. You could have saved it somewhere else and brought it back at a different point of time. So then that sort of money also wouldn't have come. So then that's what I said, it's part of the story. Some of the money would have come along informal channels. Some, the little, like the 325 would have come as recorded channels. Some would have gone to other places, or they've just kept it with them to send it later or never send it to use it for other.
So,
whatever.
Dr. Belisha, what does it mean for the country? Because if you look at it, strict action or stringent action was taken by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and if I may recollect right, 3 to 4 individuals were even arrested for bringing down money through the Hawala or the Undial system. That was not clear at any of the press releases, but the motive of the central bank was to nab individuals who are bringing down money through alternative or other means. So none of this has worked. None of this has worked. Is that what you're trying to say?
You mean to say
because
stopping the informal channels has not worked?
Yes, the informal channels.
It is very hard to stop this. You have to understand these informal channels have been in existence for centuries. Yeah. They have not just started just during the pandemic. They have so many networks, they are well connected and they are well established. Right. And they have come to a point where they are credible to a certain segment of the market. So it's difficult. You can have a lot of campaign, but at the end of the day, people look at the difference, price difference, the cost difference, right. The cost of remittances. So if there's a high cost of remittances through the formal channels and the informal channels offer a better exchange rate, better cost, I mean the service charge is better, the fees that they charge, then all in all the package is better to send, and then they might think my risks are compensated with the return.
But Dr. Belisha, what is the alternative? Now we are having a crisis that is very well established. We all agree that the peg on the US dollar is one of the reasons behind the work remittances not coming directly through formal channels. What is the alternative? What can the government do?
One thing is we have to have a credible foreign exchange rate. Right now, when people don't think that it is realistic, and then there are other places that you can achieve a higher return for your dollars, right. Then it's attractive. No, naturally you will want to go there unless you are highly patriotic and you can spare that extra 40 rupees that you would have earned outside.
Right. But that will have a negative impact as far as the imports are concerned as well, right, Dr. Belisha?
Yes, definitely. But then also, this is
There's always a ripple effect.
Yes, there is a ripple effect, but then we have to understand how far can you really control certain things when then there are a lot of pressure, demand and supply pressure from the other sides. And if we can't supply sufficient amounts of currencies to balance this off, it is not going to be stable, no?
Thank you very much, Dr. Birisha. We are Ratna Research Fellow, Institute of Policy Studies. We, of course, will have more questions coming our way with regard to migrant worker remittances, as well as how can we cushion the Sri Lankan foreign reserves through migrant worker remittances, which played a huge role as far as the country's foreign reserves were concerned at one point. We now move our attention to Daniel Alphonsus, former advisor to the Ministry of Finance. Daniel, interestingly, your former boss's name is coming up these days quite often. That is former Minister of Finance and also well-celebrated Minister of External Affairs of Sri Lanka, Mangala Samaraweera's name, because we're talking about a power crisis in the country. The Energy Minister had already said that the CPC won't provide fuel for the Ceylon Electricity Board in the long run. All this have culminated for a lot of praise to Mangala Samaraweera as the Minister of Finance at that time for introducing a fuel price formula. Do you think the government got it all wrong because of political reasons to cut out this fuel price formula, and that is why we are in a situation that we are expecting power cuts which would prolong for 2 to 4 hours on a daily basis starting from tomorrow?
Yeah. So, Shamir, with respect to the fuel price formula, with respect to the fuel crisis, which you're hypothesizing might be caused by the fuel, not implementing the fuel price formula, I think what brings all the crises that we face in Sri Lanka today, from fuel to foreign exchange, to inflation, to shortages of essential goods, to international rating agencies downgrading us, all these things all have one common element, and that is that there's a sovereign debt crisis that is currently at play. All this boils down to the fact that we've borrowed far too much, we've invested that poorly, and we've borrowed generally in foreign currency at high interest rates. Why do I say this? Because if you look at any one of these measures and any one of these crises, they boil down to the fact that Sri Lanka is unable to pay its creditors on time. Let's take the foreign exchange crisis as an example. Why do we have a foreign exchange crisis today? Because the dollar is valued at official rates at around 200 and unofficially at 250. This situation hasn't existed for quite a while in Sri Lanka. Why has it arisen today? Because the government wants to keep the rupee artificially overvalued in order to maintain a debt to GDP ratio that appears, on the books at least, to be favorable. Because the second the rupee depreciates, our debt to GDP ratio rises. And since our government revenue is in rupees and the repayments are in dollars, it will appear more difficult to repay our debts. So, and that's the common feature of all of these crises. So until we solve our sovereign debt problem, all these other crises will persist.
Daniel, interestingly, you mentioned about having a black market trade. However, if I may recollect right, and just the governor of the central bank initially said that there were 3 rates in the market. One was the central bank rate, one was the bank rate, and one was the black market rate. But now that has been neutralized, isn't it? Now we have only one rate, that's at 202 or 203, that is announced by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and then 198.50 as a selling rate. So that situation has been neutralized, isn't it?
I think we just discussed that point, that there's so many different markets for foreign currency at the moment. Right. You have the Undial system, you have people coming in and exchanging notes, you have cryptocurrency being used for exchange transactions. So there's a whole range at which the price of a dollar varies from about 240 to 250 something.
But in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrency, that is not something that the central bank has opened its doors at the moment, isn't it?
Sure, but people are trading.
Okay. So, Daniel, interestingly, I want to take you back to 2001. when Sri Lanka was facing a similar issue, similar crisis. We were almost on the verge of bankruptcy. Even at that time, our debt to GDP ratio was 101%. Now it's 110%. That's a different story altogether. But we were facing a similar crisis at that time as well. This was in 2001. However, the Ranil Wickremesinghe administration, the flaws, keep away the flaws that happened during the 2015-2019 era with the Ranil Wickremesinghe administration in power. However, in 2001, they were able to sign a peace deal with the LTTE and bring a lot of foreign direct investment to the country. They were able to bring in foreign loans to the country and cushion the foreign reserves in Sri Lanka. What is the government doing wrong right now? They are going to the Chinese, they are going to the Indians for help. And it seems that everything would be okay in a few months from now.
So I think there's two things. The first relates to the fundamental problem faced is different today than it was in 2001. Because Sri Lanka today, the debt in 2001 was largely concessional debt. Yeah. It had long maturities. Therefore, the annual repayments were in the couple of $100 million range. Today, Sri Lanka has borrowed from 2007 onwards from global capital markets at high interest rates with short maturities. What this means is that annually Sri Lanka has to repay $4 to $5 billion back. So therefore, and also the people who it has to pay back to are bondholders and the capital markets, which are much less sympathetic than official creditors and multilateral agencies, which was the case in 2001. So the challenge is greater. On the other hand, in 2002 to 2004, there was also a clear economic plan. Regaining Sri Lanka had a very clear plan. It was being implemented, and investors and economic actors had confidence that there was going to be growth, that the macroeconomic situation would be managed. So there was a much greater confidence in the government's ability to deliver its economic program and to have an economic program in the first place.
Thank you very much, Daniel Alphonsus, former advisor to the Minister of Finance. Before I go to Dr. Dunusinghe, a very quick question to you, Daniel. We are printing money right now at a rate. It's not that we can buy dollars from these rupees that we are printing. Can we?
You can always buy dollars at the market price. But however, if there's more rupees chasing the same number of dollars, then the price of dollars will increase. So if there's more supply of rupees, all these things are determined by market forces. It's a question of supply and demand. So when you increase the supply of rupees and demand for dollars for rupees is fixed, the price of rupees will fall.
Right. Thank you very much, Daniel. I have a lot more questions on those lines later on in the show. I want to quickly look at Dr. Priyanka Dunusinghe, Senior Lecturer of Economics, University of Colombo. Dr. Dunusinghe, I want to pose you the question with regard to our topic today. Is Sri Lanka economically crawling towards a dungeon? What is your opinion?
First of all, thank you for inviting me for the show. And as I think Dr. Rajapatirana mentioned, it is not sure to what extent we as the country fall into the dungeon, but I think it is quite clear that we are at a crisis at the moment, and I think most of the things already mentioned, the nature of the crisis and what is required at this moment is to have a economic program or economic how we basically overcome this issue. The way that government approach basically is to look for a few countries. As far as we can see, Sri Lanka, negotiate with China, India, and I saw some media reports on looking for Japan as well. But I think what is important to understand is that you can overcome some of the foreign exchange requirements in the short run but what is required is to have an economic program which address the structural weaknesses in the economy. Why we argue that the government should go and negotiate with IMF? Basically IMF will one way help us in say financing or help us in improving confidence. In addition, IMF will come up with the program which address the structural weaknesses in the economy. Why we have ended up with huge debt at the moment? Behind that we have the what we call the resource gap between the government revenue and the government expenditure, savings and investments. So unless we address those gaps, or unless we initiate some programs which basically improve our government revenue side and rationalize expenditure, at the same time improve productivity for higher export growth and also enhance our savings, I don't think that we are able to overcome this issue in the medium to long run. That is the requirement. I think if we expect that somehow if we manage to repay the debts by getting some money, getting some help from China or India, it will not address the structural weaknesses in the economy.
Dr. Dunsinger, now interestingly you said that it's important to find a proper reform to this problem that we are having right now. But if we recollect right, we predicted or forecasted the Asian economic crisis in the early 1990s, and we said that it's going to happen in 1997-1998 period. As a result of that, the country or the Asian region is going to be affected largely. Then in 2003-2004, the world economic crisis was predicted in 2008 that the mortgage prices, the mortgage market in the US would come down or crash down drastically. Sri Lanka also could have overseen or forecasted that we also may have or will probably have to face this predicament at the moment. However, the government went ahead and even cut taxes up to 25%, which was giving the revenue. So don't you think this is also one of the reasons that has led to this problem at present, poor economic mismanagement?
Definitely. I think I totally agree with you with respect to the poor economic management. I think the previous government, in particular the central bank, had a vision and had a plan to overcome the debt payments, because we had, we all understood that we have a difficult time from 2019 onwards, around 4 to 5 years, repayment around $5 to $6 billion per year. So with that understanding, the previous central bank governor, build up some reserve in order to pay it back in a comfortable manner. Unfortunately, we had this pandemic as well. Pandemic also affected the situation to get worse. But back in 2009, even we have some research studies which found that the long run relationship, debt and the economic growth, we don't find a one. But at a time of an economic recession, we will be in trouble due to the heavy commercial borrowing. That understanding was there. I think we had a very, this is not something that suddenly happened, but as economists, we predicted this. We have some difficult time because of in particular because of the commercial borrowings, and also where we have invested, we were very much clear that the areas where we have invested are not giving us the returns that expected, and most of the that is what we even 2016 Auditor General reports clearly indicate the difference between the amount that we have borrowed and the assets, value of the assets that we have.
So, Dr. Dunasinghe, every year Sri Lanka knows how much of debt we have to repay. That's very clear. Now, by the end of this year, we know it's going to be approximately around 6.9 billion. So, when Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, as the governor of the central bank, took the bold step to repay the international sovereign bond holders as well as international debt a few years ago, when we had our reserves, couldn't have the restructuring process of debt began at that point of time?
Yeah, it is a good question, but at that time, it was quite, comfortable to a certain extent for us to pay the debt and continue. Because when you say restructuring, we can say that the last option, maybe the one before the last resort.
No, because Dr. Dunasinghe, I'm posing this question to you. Why? Because by the end of this year, we have to pay 6.9 billion in debt repayments, right? But when the administration of Ranil Wickremesinghe plus Maithripala Sirisena gave the government to the present regime, our foreign reserves stood just above 6.5 billion US dollars. So if you really look at it, couldn't have the debt restructuring program began at that time and not now? That is what is called preemptive debt restructuring.
No, I don't think that we should have started by that time. Okay. The reason is that 6.5 billion reserve does not mean that reserve will stay the same. You get the foreign, add into the reserve and then you pay, and it is a kind of a flow that if the flow continues and if you don't expect any sort of disruption to that, it is not a big issue of managing the debt. And other thing is restructuring is, as I mentioned earlier, is not always good as such, because that could prevent us from further borrowing even, and could send a bad signal.
So
to
you are
the
saying that
investors.
restructuring is not good?
It is something that we need to do really at a time of difficulty.
But we are now in difficulty, Dr. Dunasinghe.
No, at the moment of 2019.
In 2019, we were not in difficulty, but right now we are.
Yeah, right. I mean, what I argue is that we should not have started restructuring back in 2019.
Right.
Now, certainly we have to look for that option.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dunasinghe, Senior Lecturer of Economics, University of Colombo. We are in conversation with Dr. Saratha Rajapatrina, Dr. Priyanka Dunasinghe, Daniel Alphonsus, as well as Dr. Bilisha Guirratna. On the topic, is Sri Lanka economically crawling towards a dungeon? On to my immediate right is Shehan Ranatunga. On to my immediate left is Hassan Shazuli. We'll open the floor for questions right after this commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.
One disinfectant to keep your hands, home surfaces, electronic devices and personal belongings safe from bacteria, virus and fungi. Sri Lanka's first SLS certified disinfectant, now with lemon fresh and ice pine fresh fragrances. Sun all-purpose disinfectant spray.
COVID-19 සඳහා ආරක්ෂිත පියවර. නිතරම හොඳින් සබන් යොදා දෑත් සෝදන්න. සබන් හෝ විසබීජනාශක මධ්‍යසාරයක් භාවිතා කර දෑත් පිරිසිදු කරන්න. සැම විටම අන් අය සමග මීටරයක දුරස්ථභාවයක් පවත්වා ගන්න. හැකි සෑම විටම නිවසේ රැඳී සිටින්න. නිරතුරුවම නිවැරදිව මුඛාවරණ පළඳින්න.
තනිව යන්න බෑයි කියන කාරණේද අධ්‍යාපනයේදී
මම කියන්නේ ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් සිදු වෙන දේ.
අපිට රුසියානු සපත්තුව මේ ලංකාවට දාන්න බෑ, ඒක ලොකුයි. චීන සපත්තු සීන සමාජවාදී ඒකත් හරියන්නේ නැහැ. එක මේ කකුලට පොඩි. අපි අපේම සපත්තුව මහ ගන්න ඕනේ කියලා.
එක්සත් ජාතීන්ගේ මානව හිමිකම් කවුන්සිලය කියලා කියන්නේ මානව හිමිකම් පිළිබඳව ලෝක පාර්ලිමේන්තුව.
අපි පරිසරය ගැන දෙකක් තිබෙනවා.
මම ඉස්කෝලේ යන කාලෙත් මේක තුන්වන ලෝකේ රටක්. දැන් මම මැරෙන්න යන කාලෙදිත් තුන්වන ලෝකේ රටක්.
ආණ්ඩුව රූපාන්තරණය වෙනවා රාජ්‍ය බවට.
එත දෙකේ එත පහේදී තමයි මේ වතු ඔක්කොම නැෂනලයිස් කරේ.
එහෙමයි ධර්මශ්‍රී, රට ගැන විතරක් නෙමෙයි මම ගැනත් මම බය වෙලා ඉන්නේ.
අපනයන කවුද කරන්නේ? කවුද විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයට ගියේ? කවුද අපේ ව්‍යාපාර කරන්නේ? විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයට ගියේ?
Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. As I mentioned before, right is Shahan, left is Hassan. Let's start off with Shahan.
Thank you, Shamir.
Yeah.
I'd like to pose my first question to Dr. Rajapatirna. Doctor, anyone that's analyzing the economic situation right now, particularly those who are trying to understand the government's point of view, they would say that this situation that Sri Lanka is facing is not unique to Sri Lanka. It is because of COVID. The whole world is facing this scenario right now. Firstly, can I get your opinion on that? How is this inevitable? Was this unavoidable? And do you agree with that?
I really don't think it's due to COVID, because some of the things that we are discussing about lack of growth and all those things happened before COVID. COVID certainly exacerbated it. There's no question about that. Things are more difficult because of COVID. They increase expenditure to maintain all the things that they are now doing. So I won't say it's due to COVID, but COVID makes it even more difficult than otherwise. But actually, if you look at the system over medium term, we did not make use of the opportunities to, as Daniel and everybody here said, to use the term that is like restructure. It's reform. I use the word reform. We have problems. We knew we had to pay these debts, but it begins even before, and I think we alluded to it, because our investment, we borrowed at commercial rates, as we say, and we invested in long gestation period projects that are very low return in short run, but also can be converted to repay our debt because it's in non-payables. So that we inherited, that each government inherited. So our problems began some time ago, but it got exacerbated because of COVID. But I have to say though, the first initial reaction, it was handled very, very good, and we had lower rates of mortality rate and things like that. And so now we are in a different phase because of Omicron and all that. But also the other things, other problems are also keeping up, repaying the debt, planning to get things going in the system. That is what I find missing.
From the point of view of the general public, it can be difficult to understand where should the priority lie. Debt repayment, is it we have all these various needs that have to be met, whether it be food, whether it be fuel, as we know now, because there's an energy crisis, there's power cuts. It seems like there's so many questions being asked of the authorities. So Doctor, what do you think, where has the priority need to be placed right now? What's the first most important thing?
Today the role of a government in any country is to have a set of priorities and carry that out. Okay, so I would say, for example, reverse some of the things that we did. First of all, the reduction in the VAT rate from 15 to 8% is one very important reason why we are having problems with repayment. Not enough money, revenue is fallen, and we can reconstitute it by saying correctly that we didn't anticipate, nobody anticipated the COVID-19, and that we can say, so we reduced tariff rates, VAT rate at this without knowing what's going to happen. Now we are quite justified to go back to the situation before and say now we have to raise our VAT rate, because it's one of the taxes that it brings in a lot of money. Countries that abandoned the VAT rate like India came back to it because when they realized that it's a fair tax also, right? Number one. Number two is that I am very interested in what I call incentive reforms. We have high protection. We are trying to do all this with import substitution, which is an error we have seen from the rest of the world. And we have to build up credibility that the government has this program, everybody understands it. We have leaders who we can trust and they can get this delivered. Those are the things that are missing at the moment. And I hope that something will happen to address these issues. Macroeconomic stability, we have inflation waiting to happen. Because as pointed out, we printed a lot of money. When they get spent, as prices go up, they will start spending money and the inflation rate goes up further. And then if our normal response to this is to tighten send all the inspectors and see who is hoarding, that type of thing, will make it worse. So we have to have a sort of sit down with people who understand it. And I'm personally very sad that we didn't want to go to the IMF. I cannot really rationalize it why.
No, but there are countries, Dr. Rajapatirana, that has not gone to the IMF when debt restructuring takes place. Countries like Belize, they have restructured their debt at least 4 times in the last 15 years, and they never went to the IMF.
Yeah, so is Belize your model? Why would we do things that Belize have been doing? Because we are entirely different circumstances.
So now that is the same thing, Dr. Rajapatirana, that this government is also saying. We want a homegrown solution.
Yeah, very nice sounding.
Mechanism.
Why don't we try to produce everything here? Why do you want to import anything? You know, we can do homegrown solution. Do you think that will work?
You are saying, Dr. Rajapatirana, we can be like Cuba, because under Fidel Castro, they didn't deal with US dollars at all in Cuba.
But do you know what happened?
North Korea is not dealing with US dollars. Look at Iran for that matter. Now they are heavily sanctioned.
Look at the misery in North Korea. Look at the misery. They are eating grass. And also all those countries like even Cuba, reporting on health is totally unreliable. They have no free press. Okay? All the stuff that health numbers that they give, I don't believe it because nobody can contest it.
So you're saying Sri Lanka is going to be like that, Dr. Rajapatirana?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying why do you want to follow those bad examples?
Dr. Rajapatirana, this very clearly now at the inception of this show as well, and you had also written an article about this, clearly outlining the fact, outlining your stance rather, stating that Sri Lanka should restructure its debt.
Yeah.
My question to you is regarding the grounds on which you make that argument, because let me just quote this article which we have written. You say that it will come at a great cost to the people of this country who will face shortages of essentials like food, medicine and fuel.
Yes.
Now, my question, Dr. Rajapatirana, is that Sri Lanka is negotiating with India for a $1 billion credit line.
Yeah.
And that is exactly to purchase food, essential items, medicines, everything that you're talking about. So if Sri Lanka is paying $500 million in making the international sovereign bond payment and then negotiating for a $1 billion credit line just to import essential items, don't you think it's better to just pay off the debt and then get this credit line as well?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. If the restructuring, if we have a restructuring program also with it, okay? So in other words...
But the whole reason for your argument, the fact that Sri Lanka should restructure its debt, is that money can be used to purchase essential items.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we are getting that money through a line of credit from India, what makes you think that we shouldn't settle the ISB payment?
No, because we have to, at each point in time, you have certain set of priorities. Okay, so now if you can assure me that there's a lot of milk and honey situation, we get all these people lending money to us, fine, I have no problem. But even then, you have to put the house in order, dealing with the immediate problem of, as you said, milk, food. People are in queues now, so if we can pay them, it's fine. But here it is problem is that we don't know what type of a deal that is being taken place. Is not transparent. Okay, we like to know what type of quid pro quo is here when you have a swap agreement with any particular country. They can say, oh, we can give you so much, but we want to see the other thing done. We don't know that.
Dr. Rajabhat,
we want to
all the experience.
Sorry,
with all the experience in the World Bank, can you please try and tell me the logic behind this argument? Now, the government goes to the Chinese foreign minister and asks and requests for a debt restructuring program.
Yeah.
However, does not want to restructure the debt at large, because 40% of our debt is ISPs at the end of the day. What is the logic of the government doing that? Now, the government goes to the Chinese and says, let's please help us restructure our debt. You saw that sentiments being expressed by the president of the country itself, Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Yeah.
So they're visiting foreign minister of China. However, they don't want to restructure the debt at large.
They meaning our government or the Chinese?
Of course, but who else? We're talking about the government. They meaning our government.
So actually, you have to ask them. You're asking the wrong person.
No, I'm asking. That's what I'm saying. No, I don't understand. That is why I'm asking you.
Yeah, neither do I.
30 years you've been in the.
Neither do I.
Neither do you. So anyway, Dr. Dunusingha, interestingly, we are talking about these numbers now. Shehan brought this issue up with regard to the dollar reserves in Sri Lanka, and also Hassan spoke about the dollar reserves in the country at the moment. So we had 3.1 billion by the end of December last year. Now we are discussing for 1.5 billion US dollars from India, which would take us to 4.6 billion. If we pay ISBs by tomorrow, that's accounting to 500 million US dollars, we'll be ending up with a solid foreign reserves of 4.1 billion, right?
Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
So we'll have 4.1 billion. So the government has not fared that bad, because a few weeks ago, we only had 1.5 billion. But the government has been able to pull a rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah, it is a rabbit, all right.
It's a rabbit, all right, but
no, I think
not sure it's a rabbit or not. Right, yes, Dr. Singh.
I think you know that I think even in a previous program, you asked whether government will basically settle this 500 and then $1,000 million sovereign bond. That time also we basically said yes. I think today's the major issue not really of building up this reserve through various swap agreements and through other channels, but how to basically get the economy out of this crisis situation. From the one hand, you have all these shortage of goods, not just the consumer goods, but also the intermediate as well as the investment goods. On the other hand, you have all the other economic problems such as rising poverty and unemployment and other issues. So what is important at this moment is to basically get the economy out of the present situation, while we making sure that we pay the debts and then address the other issues.
Dr. Dunusingha, why do I get the feeling, I may be probably biased because I need to be the devil's advocate here, because there is no government representative on our show today. Why do I get the feeling that the economists of this country are waiting for a disaster to happen?
No, the way that if you look at, if we think that this situation will improve automatically, I think it is a misconception. Certainly we need a economic program at this moment with some reforms. That is how, if you look back, that is how we basically, you know, get the economy out of a crisis. And at the moment, you know, when you look at the public finance, you can clearly see there is a gap between the government expenditure and the government revenue. And if you look at the investments, if you look at the foreign direct investments,
right,
all those areas, you can clearly see that we are at the moment trying to, you know, manage the risk with respect to default. But in addition, we need to basically, more importantly, we need to get the economy out of this situation and record a a growth rate which is conducive for, you know, giving jobs and giving increasing income and giving opportunities for those who lost their livelihood during this pandemic situation. You know, we need to.
Now, Dr. Singh, you are talking like a politician.
No. I mean, no.
Now you removed your cap of economist. Now you're talking like a politician. Now you're saying jobs have to be provided, no austerity measures have to be taken, so on and so forth.
No, definitely we know that people lost jobs during the pandemic.
Yeah, but not everyone can be made happy. No,
it is true. No,
it is not that we make the cake at the same time. Can you?
No, it is not that we make everyone happy at this moment. But we need to. We must know that there are sizable number of people who lost jobs, both in the agriculture as well as in the non-agriculture sectors.
Dr. Dunasinghe, now even in your opening remarks, you are highlighting the fact that we need an economic program that addresses the structural weaknesses in the country's economy. Now, that was something that you said a few minutes ago. That was something that you said in your opening remarks as well. As an economist, what would you consider the best, the ideal economic program that you're referring to? What do you have in mind when you say that?
Yeah, I have a few things. Number one, we need to improve the foreign exchange earnings. That is basically increasing the exports, both goods and services. That should be the number one priority. In order to do so, you need to improve the business environment. You need to come up with reforms with respect to labor, and you need to attract foreign direct investments, basically to get the exports, improve the exporting. Second, and most importantly, you need to narrow the gap between the public revenue and the expenditure. In order to do so, you have to rationalize the expenditure and as well as increase the revenue. So basically, cut down the corruptions and other waste with respect to public expenditure. Then the third, you need to basically, we have this port city, we have other investment opportunity. You have to attract the investors for that. Okay. So, and also now additionally, we know that agriculture sector, as a result of some of the policies implemented by the government, now it is in trouble. We have to, reactivate it, and through either whether government go with the, organic fertilizer or inorganic fertilizer, whatever it is, government need to understand the current situation and come up with the program which at least we can, improve the situation in the Jala season.
Yeah, Dr. Bilesha, sorry Mr. Dunasinghe, this Dr. Bilesha, now Mr. Dunasinghe, Dr. Dunasinghe was speaking about formulating an economic program, and the first thing that he highlighted was boosting the country's foreign reserves and foreign reserves. So in your opening remarks, you were referring to this whole scenario where the government needs to allow the rupee to float so that we can attract more worker remittances to the country, and that is when towards the end we were discussing how it may even affect importers as well. Do you really think that allowing the rupee to float is the only solution to attract remittances into the country, or are there any other solutions that the government needs to consider?
First, I would like to ask, what sort of remittances do you want?
Workers' remittances.
No, I mean formal remittances or informal. So then if you keep this dual exchange rate going, then you're attracting all sorts of remittances. Formal remittances will come in that way to the 202 rate, and the informal remittances would come. So I'm not saying that you have to completely floor it, but have some reasonable, reliable exchange rate where people will not have expectations of getting a very, very high rate outside. And I think there was something to this was alluded also. I think the Labour Minister has requested to at least increase the foreign workers' remittances, the rate that they get to 240.
In your opinion, is 240 a reasonable rate, or do you think?
Somewhat reasonable, because the black market was giving in November, October, November until mid-December also they were giving like 240. So that is somewhat of a balance between the formal rate and what somebody would get outside. So then there is no major incentive to not send through the formal channel.
So, Dr. British, just correct me if I'm wrong here. I just want to clarify this statement that you just made now. You're saying that the incentive, which was standing at 10 rupees for additional, for every dollar converted into rupees, should be increased to 40 rupees at least, so the work remittances get a better advantage when sending money through the formal channels.
This is what the Labour Minister said.
No, I'm asking your opinion.
So my opinion is, I don't know the exact place, exact number where it should be, but not 202, because 202 is discouraging people to send it through the formal channel.
So, so Dr. Biresh, now when someone sends, just going back into these figures now, 325 against the 800 million US dollars expected year on year for Sri Lankan work remittances. So there's an excess of US dollars in the market at present. Is it?
Which market?
In Sri Lanka. Probably on the black market.
The whole point is we don't have enough foreign exchange.
No, so through the formal channels we don't have, but through the informal channels we have an excess of approximately around 350 to 400 million US dollars.
No, we could not say that, no, because we don't know whether the exact difference between this 325 and the 8 came through informal remittances. It would have stayed outside without coming to Sri Lanka at all. And
but wouldn't have there been a possibility, Dr. Bilesha, because of the pandemic, Sri Lankans lost their jobs in the Middle East, and as a result of that, most of these migrant workers or expat workers came back to the country. And that is one of the reasons that the numbers have dwindled quite sharply.
Definitely, that is one of a very significant contributing factor.
Yeah.
Yes, but still...
but you have to look at both sides of the coin, no, Dr. Bilesha?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. But now the way that we always say it's worker remittances, but then not only these migrant workers send these remittances, and there's no way of differentiating diaspora remittances as against worker remittances. So all these remittances do come, so the amount of remittances that the migrant workers would have sent would have gone down, but when we look at the entire remittances that come into the country, is not composed of only migrant workers. So that segment went down, as you said, correctly said. But then we have to also...
The government really can't help it, can they?
What are you alluding at now?
No, I'm not alluding at anything. I'm just saying the government can't do anything about people returning back to Sri Lanka because of the fact that they've lost their jobs because of the pandemic.
Yes, you can. You have to bring them back and take care of them. That is a different story.
So that is what the government is doing.
Yes.
They even went to the extent of giving them 5,000, 10,000 rupees as well during the pandemic at one point.
Yes, they did. But the thing is now...
but what I'm saying is, Dr. Bilisha, we need to look at both sides of the coin, you know. We seem to be looking at one side of the coin saying, okay, work remittances have not come to Sri Lanka, but there is another side of the coin which is very clear that a lot of migrant workers lost their jobs in the Middle East, and as a result of that, they have returned home as well.
But Shamil, there are still migrant workers overseas and who are very annoyed with the situation and not willing to send the money that they want to send. Many have said it personally. You have to see some of these Twitter discussions or Facebook discussions that's going on. These are real people, real migrant, Sri Lankan migrant workers commenting in Sinhala, or that is all that I can read off as a native language in Sri Lanka. So very broad spectrum of migrant workers. Even high-skilled workers feel this way.
Dr. Bilesha, now you keep highlighting that that the government should allow the rupee to float, and ideally we should have an exchange rate, say about 240, right? But my question is, now you said that informal channels have existed for centuries, right? Even when the government didn't peg the rupee. So how do you think it's going to help this situation? If we are trying to draw in, now we know that there is money coming in from informal channels, and we are trying to bring it into the formal channels. So that's the whole purpose of increasing the exchange rate. But informal channels, like you pointed out, have existed for centuries.
Yes, now the point is there are certain people who were very faithful to the formal channel, have been sending through the formal channel, but suddenly with this huge gap between the formal and informal exchange rates, have been discouraged to use the formal channels. So that segment we have diverted them. Normally what we are trying to do is get them back into the formal channel.
Can I comment on this? We cannot really talk about the exchange rate in relation to one activity.
Yes.
You know, you can't have different exchange rate for different activities. The exchange rate is a macroeconomic price. So it is one of the items that that encourages exports on the one hand, try to create a more efficient income distribution, food substitution, import substitution. So it cannot be sort of a say we have exchange rate for this, that and the other. We can have other ways of rewarding people, for example, like giving compensatory funding for people who have lost their jobs, obviously. Why do it through the exchange rate? Do it like they done before, 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees. I have no problem with that. But we can't use the exchange rate to go from one sector to another. Because exchange must apply to all the sectors.
But even while doing that, Dr. Rajapaksa, the number is only at $325.2 million US dollars.
Can I ask you a question, Shamir?
Yeah, please.
What's the problem with having a large informal remittance system? Why is a formal remittance system important? There's a market for dollars. Whether it happens in place X or Y shouldn't matter.
So, but how
can I comment on this? The informal remittances, they don't come to Sri Lanka as dollars. That is the whole point. So we don't get that foreign currency into the country.
It comes in rupees.
It comes in rupees. It's
so
just circulating.
It's a clearing of the different. So there's liabilities that are generated on the one hand by, let's say, an exporter. An importer will generate a liability, and then a migrant worker will want to remit the money. So it clears. So it's exactly like importing and exporting, but instead of the dollars being transferred, the liabilities are being transferred. So why should it matter? What difference does it make from normal economic activity?
But if you want dollars to pay for our other activities, for our imports, for our oil imports, our vehicle imports, if we don't have sufficient dollars in the country, nobody's going to take our rupees. No, we have lumps of rupees at home, but what can we do in the global market with
I would love to answer a question, Daniel, if I was in the panel.
No,
but,
so just I
think
just to briefly to come back on that. So the point being, there is not a problem of insufficient dollars. There is a problem of what these dollars are being of supply and demand. So if we allow the currency to operate as it should, you have an entirely informal market, there will be no problem importing fuel to the country today.
I wouldn't say so, because still the dollars wouldn't come into the country.
No, see, what happens just to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Bilesha, for Daniel's information also, what happens through a Hawala or the Undial system is, the person, let's say in Dubai, Daniel, he gives the money to associate in Dubai.
Correct.
The associate in Dubai calls associate in Colombo and tells him, this guy has given me so much of money, give him X amount of money in rupees. So the dollars won't come to the country. It will remain in Dubai itself.
So then how does that person settle his agent?
Which agent?
So
in Colombo.
In Colombo. How? So the rupees are being transferred in Colombo, and then how is that person settled?
So he's settled in Dubai. He's settled in Dubai.
So then the agent is settled in Dubai as well. No, that cannot be. That funds must be then given to somebody who is purchasing, let's say, goods. So then they need to give give an exporter needs to give dollars.
This is as Bilesha correct me if I'm wrong, Bilesha. This is a worldwide network. It doesn't necessarily happen from a country like Dubai and Saudi Arabia. It happens in countries like Turkey. It happens in countries like Germany, which are predominantly of migrant workers. And it is not only a system that is unique to Sri Lanka. It happens across the borders. Let's say a Turkish person, probably a Filipino who's in Turkey, might send the money through the Undial or the Hawala system, right, Bilesha? So
Yes.
it's a network. So ultimately what happens is that amount of dollars don't come to the country. So it's been handled by a proper mafia or a proper scheme, and ultimately the person who is involved gets the dollars through informal channels again, right, Bilesha? That's how it happens, right?
Yes, and then I think there is some truth to what the central bank has also been saying, that it might be financing illegal activities. So sometimes these are not bilateral.
Money laundering as well.
Yes, these are not bilateral transactions always. These are very complicated. It goes through 3-4 countries, 3-4 nodes, and then you really don't know who's really collecting, who's really paying out, and for what purpose they are collecting. So there's a lot of gray area and informality and risk involved also in that.
So it all happens, Daniel, through trust. So
Yes.
the person in Dubai or Saudi Arabia wouldn't even have met the person in Sri Lanka.
So, but my point is that the agent here will also have a counterparty that wants those dollars. So the migrant worker is giving dollars to the agency house in Dubai. That person then settles the beneficiary here. But on the other hand, there's somebody who requires those dollars for importing. So they contact the agent in Colombo and say, I need to import these things, can you pay a person? So there are goods arriving in Sri Lanka on the basis of those payments. That could be fuel, for example. But the problem is we have regulated this entire thing. We have price controls, we have controls on fuel, everything is controlled.
No, but
if you liberalize that market, you liberalize the foreign exchange market, you liberalize the fuel market, people could then import fuel.
So I want to pick Dr. Bilesha's brain on this. Now, it doesn't happen that way, right, Dr. Bilesha? Because
yes, I know what you're trying to say, that if you
are
just
saying it offsets
yes.
the liability as well.
But
that's right, because
it has to offset.
Has to, theoretically it is, but then is it coming through the government? How
does it
is
matter? Why does it matter that it comes through the government?
So sometimes government is the one who has to pay all this.
No, why does the government have to pay? I can import fuel. Why shouldn't I be able to import my own fuel if I wanted to?
And started from day zero, then we could do it. But now we are already in this muddle.
So what I'm asking is, why does the government have to import fuel? Why can't the private sector import fuel?
Yeah, Dr. Rajwardhan.
Yeah, actually all this discussion can be solved, can be reconciled by saying float the exchange rate, okay, find out what is the equilibrium, what the equilibrium is going to be. It will overshoot at the beginning, that's the standard studies. It will overshoot and settle down. There is no other way. If somebody, economists, go and ask me, can you tell us what the exchange rate is going to be, what is the proper, you have no answer. The only answer comes through the market here. If some bureaucrat sits at 10 stories above and say this price, that is wrong. So the only way to deal all these difficulties is to have a competitive exchange rate that equilibrates supply and demand in the foreign exchange market.
And
leave
you
it
see
there.
distortion after distortion.
Yeah.
Because you have a state monopoly on fuel imports,
Yeah.
you have this distortion in the foreign exchange market, you have another distortion in another market, and you have this cascading effect of complexity
Daniel,
and muddled thinking.
Yeah, but Daniel, do you know how much of what's the bond amount when bringing down fuel and gas to the country is?
So in almost every country,
it's approximately around 350 to 400 million US dollars. Can you and I afford that? I can't.
So there are many different markets for oil as well. There isn't only one market.
Yeah.
You can purchase oil. I can purchase oil on the spot market at much smaller quantities.
Right.
There's no reason actually, for the government to do all these things.
Yeah, there's
Rest
no
of the
necessity
world
for the government
don't
to
do
do
it
so.
that
They
way.
can probably privatize and get the private sector's involvement there.
You don't even have to privatize. You can just open it up.
Yeah, open it up.
Keep CPC running, but also open up the sector.
And then we will have not substandard gas into the country, Daniel.
Oh, yes,
we will have substandard oil also.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah,
because you can't sell it. If you lose the reputation by, by not selling proper oil, nobody will go to it.
In fact, CPC is the one that has that reputation.
Now, Dr. Rajapathan, you are saying they have to take accountability. Now look at the gas crisis in Sri Lanka.
That's precisely because Litro was nationalized. If Shell gas was there, I'm willing to wager we wouldn't have had that gas crisis.
Right. Anyway,
can I make one comment?
Yeah,
I think now this about this for exchange rate, what we really want to have it, whether to float it or keep it 202. I think from the economist point of view, what happens when you keep a exchange rate which is undervalued is that basically it will create an anti-export bias, what we call in economics. And what we really need at this moment is to promote export, get more resources into the exporting sector. To produce export goods or services. At this moment, what we promote, resources are getting reallocated into areas which basically promote production for the domestic economy. So as a result, resources are misallocated. So this will, create a really, it is counter to what we really need at this moment. So that is the principle. That is why we need to reflect the true value of the exchange rate. It is true that it will, increase the prices of certain essential goods. Already, you could see that certain goods and services, the prices have increased, and you cannot keep at this rate and go. What happens is that you create. It will cost to the economy. At the moment, you don't see the cost, but there are misallocation of resources in the economy that we need to correct.
Yeah, just to give some clarity on the informal channels that Dr. Bilisha was talking about, what happens here is the fact that through informal channels, the US dollars do not come into the country. So what happens is the individuals in Sri Lanka have an excess of Sri Lankan rupees, and as a result of that, what happens is they interchange the money and the USD does not come to the country.
Neither do the rupees leave.
Yes.
Excuse me? Yeah,
neither do the
but
rupees leave.
You can't, there is no value to the Sri Lankan rupee at the moment.
Why? Because of the exchange rate issue.
Yeah,
if the exchange rate was floated, the market would clear and we wouldn't have this problem.
Right. Anyway, there were times, even during the UNP regime.
I don't care about UNP or SLFP.
There were times that there was a peg on the US dollar, and even at that time. Now it's no point of crying over spilt milk on that. But
we're looking for solutions, right? And nobody is able to explain why this won't solve our current predicament.
Right. Agreed. So now the GDP growth, Dr. Rajapathan, is quite steadily going up. If you look at the numbers, I can quote you the numbers. In 2018, Sri Lanka's GDP growth rate was 3.3%.
Yeah.
2019, 2.3%. Then 2020, because of the pandemic and so on and so forth, we had a negative growth of 3.6%. Right. And then 2021, we're expecting a growth rate of approximately 4% to 4.3%. And now the governor of the central bank is saying that we are expecting a growth rate of 5.5% by the end of this year as well. Dr. Rajapathan, looking at the GDP growth rate, there is no crisis in Sri Lanka. Don't you think so?
Yeah, let me address that. They're a little bit more complicated than that.
Right.
Here's the thing. If you take the whole period of, say, last 50 years, our GDP growth rate was something like 4.3%. Okay. So one reason why our GDP growth rate has not moved higher than the 4.3 is that our productivity is very low. So-called total factory productivity is very low. So without having reforms of the type that we are discussing, the exchange rate on the regulation and all these things, those are the things that will raise our productivity. There are studies done outside this country about this country that I studied, I seen about our total factor growth has been like about 1 to 2% over a very long period. We can't be running, having a higher GDP growth rate without fixing the productivity problem by incentive reforms, which we have not done for a long time. So I would be happy to see that we have taken these steps to improve the incentive system, get a productivity thing, then our growth will go up as a result.
Right. So Daniel, we were talking about the exchange rates and so on and so forth. What is your opinion about debt restructuring?
So to take Shahan's question earlier, what are the priorities? When should we prioritize food and fuel? When should we prioritize paying off bondholders and other creditors? For me, the answer to this question is the moment it becomes clear that there is no other path but a debt restructuring, then you should take it as soon as possible, because you want to limit the amount of pain in that transitional period. Right now, we are having a very long period because we are having many of the effects of a default. We've lost access to capital markets. That's creating all kinds of problems in our economy. We are experiencing already the effects of essentially what we would experience in a default. It'll get worse should we actually default. But the second it becomes clear, we should default and get it over with as soon as possible and begin our recovery process. The question I would ask of those who say that Sri Lanka should not default today is, can you give me some clear metrics for when it is clear that Sri Lanka will be insolvent? In advance, say, if our tax to GDP ratio, government revenue as a share of our debt reaches a certain percentage, then we should repay. Or our debt to GDP ratio reaches a certain percentage, then we should default, and so on and so forth. For those who are saying that Sri Lanka is not insolvent, no one is willing to say this is the point at which I will consider Sri Lanka insolvent.
But Daniel, when you look at the numbers, it's quite evident that we are a bit too late even for debt restructuring, aren't we? Because the debt restructuring program at least takes to 6 to 9 months for it to materialize. You have to discuss, you have to speak to the ISP holders. It's a long process.
It's definitely longer than 9 months. The shortest restructuring in recent times has been Ecuador. That was about a year. And that's a country that has a very different structure to its economy, in a region that has a lot of expertise in debt restructuring, and in some ways less complicated debt problems. In Sri Lanka's case, we have many different types of creditors. We have multilateral creditors, we have bilateral creditors, of which there's different creditors with different incentives. We have bondholders. We have multiple jurisdictions for our bonds. We have ISBs that are issued under New York law and subject to international law. We have SLDBs, which are subject to domestic law, even though they're in US currency. We have our local T-bills and T-bonds. So we have that complexity. We also have the complexity of how the courts will respond, because our courts have responded in very unusual ways on a number of issues. For example, on the issue of duality, how international law applies to domestic law. So here, the Republic has made a covenant under New York law. How that will be taken by the local courts, especially considering that a lot of the ISB bonds are held domestically by domestic banks. So these are all complexities that arise. It's not going to be a short process.
Mr. Alphonsus, also those who argue against default say that should we default, it will have a very negative impact on the ratings which are already downgraded. What's the difference if we choose to not default and make the debt payment versus we restructure? How do they affect the ratings?
So my point,
or if you were to compare the two,
is that Sri Lanka is insolvent, therefore it will have to default at some point, so it should do it early. However, if somebody is still of the view that Sri Lanka there's a path to regaining debt sustainability without defaulting, I would say take it, but can you please explain that to me? Nobody, as far as I can see, has presented a credible plan for achieving debt sustainability for Sri Lanka at the moment. And I think the credit rating agencies will respond very favorably if somebody can present such a plan that is credible.
Dr. Dunsing, isn't that a subjective notion? Because it's in the eyes of the central bank that they decide, okay, we can't pay our debt, and henceforth we have to go for a restructuring process. Now, Daniel is of the opinion that there needs to be a credible program, and credible evidence have to be presented whether or not whether we can sustain our debts in the future. So isn't that a subjective notion?
It is not, I think, easy to say whether it is subjective or the objective. But I think I agree with Daniel that it is important to present a program which basically spell out how government is going to basically settle the debts in coming, not just within this year, but even within 2 to 3 years. That will basically improve the credibility of the government plan as well as improve the confidence among the investors. Now we are looking for for indirect investments for the port city and other places. With that respect, I think it is very important that we present a plan.
Yeah, Dr. Dunse, can't you remember a few years ago when the Justice Minister spoke about the port city bill? He said that Sri Lanka is earmarked to get $11 billion as FDIs. Now, where is this 11 billion?
Yeah.
The port city is almost being constructed, public love to go, but the question mark is, where is this 11 billion that the Justice Minister was talking about at that time? So all this is a facade, no, Dr. Dunse?
No, basically if you look at the development plan of the port city, so we have identified certain investment projects, which some of them real estate, some of them financial, what you call the International Financial Center, then you have hospital, you have schools, you have other other facilities. Basically for that you need to get the investors to invest.
Who will come if the country is in default?
No, definitely that is the very reason why the government must come up with the plan which clearly spell out how government is going to basically handle this situation.
We might have another option, no, Dr. Dunse. We can sell the port city land to the Chinese as well.
I do not know whether that will be at one stage, whether that will be an option, but
because
certainly
the administration has been very steadfast in selling state assets, despite the fact they say that they are not the ones who sold. If you look at the skyline of Colombo today, most of the lands were owned by the Sri Lankan military at one point. Dr. Dunse?
No comments.
Dr. Rajapatra, now let me go back a few years when the ISP really started.
Yeah.
Sri Lanka was never 2007. Sri Lanka was never reliant on ISPs before 2007. So it was, if you look at the governor at that time, does it ring a bell?
Don S. Jayawardena. We discussed that at that time.
Yeah.
I asked him, why are you going to do this?
Yeah, and
he said, look, we have to get some pricing idea.
Right.
That's why he did it. But you are very careful about, there's nothing wrong with that. Only thing is that then it sort of ballooned up, and so went out of, in a way, some way went out of control.
So my question to you is, Dr. Rajapatrana, some may look at this paying of debt as a fishy exercise. Even last week, Dr. Rajapatrana, when I had 5 members of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, ex-chairman, on the show to talk about the debt restructuring program in Sri Lanka, I asked one of them, I sound something fishy here. Why are we so arrogant and steadfast about paying off this $500 million due on the 18th of January? Is there any close associates who have bought these ISPs of the present regime?
That I don't know actually. I don't know. But I think that the priority was in our mind very clear. That is that we should have used the 500 million to, the government has not taken our advice, 500 million to address issues like infant milk, fuel, other essential goods. You know, the priorities had to be decided by the government that has been elected by the people to good for the people. So we felt that 4 of us ended up in the same recommendation, although we didn't talk.
No, do you smell something fishy? Because in the eyes of the general public, they might start thinking, why is the government paying $500 million US
That's a good
as
question.
ISB debt when we don't even have milk powder, when the Minister of Energy is saying that we don't even have fuel?
That is the question that we raised, saying why don't we just pay this, use it to get essential items like as I mentioned, and that we could in the meantime not have a discussion about restructuring the debt. There's a ways of, either you have a well-structured way of approaching it, or do it haphazardly. If you get haphazardly, then you have a big problem.
But I like the way Dr. Rajapatirana, how there is political tug of war in the government now. Because at one point, the Minister of Energy is saying that we won't provide fuel to the CEB.
Unless you pay it in dollars.
Unless you pay it in dollars. And the minister in charge of the CEB is saying, I will try to get the dollars as quickly as possible, but provide us some with fuel. Now I'm trying to wonder the situation that the Minister of Power, Electricity is in. Where is he going to source the dollars when the government don't have the dollars, Dr. Rajapatirana?
No, I think that if you go on collective responsibility, I think it's utterly irresponsible for one member of the cabinet to say, hey, I'm not going to get you this thing if you don't pay me in dollars. I think that is totally, emasculates the whole idea of cabinet collective responsibility.
But Dr. Rajapatirana, where do you think the CPC is going to find the dollars? If
No,
the
I don't know. That's not a question I have to answer. I asked you. I don't have to answer that question. No. See, there's another thing that going back to...
No, if you say they are being irresponsible, then...
No, what happened is this is the truth. Is that public enterprises, not public operations get fuel and they don't pay it. They don't even account for it. So naturally somebody who is going to be in charge of it is going to be very frustrated because he is not going to get paid. He'll have very bad books to show. And again, this is a case of where we don't have competition. Why should the government be running electricity? Why should the government be doing...
But Dr. Rajapatirana, what I don't understand is, now if I don't pay my electricity bill for 1 month or 2 months maximum, they come and disconnect it.
Yeah.
So I have to pay my electricity.
Right.
If I go to the petrol station to pump petrol, I have to pay money at that very point. I don't know about the gentlemen who are here.
You can give a credit card.
Yeah, you can give a credit card also, but you have to pay. Ultimately, it's going from your pocket.
Yeah.
So when a situation like that happens, where CPC and the CEB are reliant on public's money, I don't know how these companies are going at a loss. Whatever money that they dictate, we pay. How does that happen?
Yeah, but actually it is a case that public enterprises, they are very well known, I won't mention public enterprises, have never made any money, okay, from the time they were established. First of all, they didn't have the comparative advantage to produce those goods and services, and it had to be state-owned, and so people postponed. So they used to talk and say, yeah, can you send me so many sort of barrels of say fuel, and I will put in my account saying we owe you so much, and that's forgotten there. So some day of reckoning comes where the guy who is selling the from the government entity will have to collect the money. So there's some point to it, but they should have reconciled that in the cabinet instead of coming and discussing it, trying to get all the people involved in it from outside.
And they're trying to be heroes. They're trying to be heroes.
I don't think it's any surprise that this day of reckoning has been postponed for so long because the time at which we start borrowing on capital markets is also the time at which reform stops.
Yes, of course.
From 1977 to 2005, we had continuous reforms. Every couple of years, whatever government came, there were reforms. Once we started borrowing commercially, and this is also, mind you, at a time when global liquidity was at a height. Because the quantitative easing post the financial crisis, the Chinese capital surplus. So it was very easy for countries like ours to borrow and to kick the can down the road in terms of problems. It allowed us to avoid restructuring our state-owned enterprise. It allowed us to double the size of the public sector in just about 10 years. It allowed us to avoid engaging in any of the structural reforms that were in the pipeline. The momentum would have naturally led to it. And but it's starting again. You can see that as the rubber hits the road again, we see reform starting. The Trincomalee oil farms, it appears there's going to be put to some productive use. The Grand Oriental Hotel, Hyatt and Hilton, there's at least a partial privatization that seems to be on the pipeline. I expect Sri Lankan Airlines to be sorted out by the end of the year. There are guarantees, sovereign guarantees on all the planes which are leased. So should Sri Lanka default, those sovereign guarantees will no longer be applied. So it's a question what the leaser of those planes will do once the sovereign guarantee is withdrawn. I, for one, will not be buying tickets on Sri Lankan Airlines post-June.
Right. Dr. Nursinga, how dangerous are we placed right now globally? Now, we're talking about the debt crisis that we are currently facing at the moment. We've invested quite vigorously at infrastructure development projects. Look at the Lotus Tower that is built in Colombo, constructed through a Chinese loan. Then the Hambantota port, the Hambantota airport. All these were built with Chinese loans. So have we used those loans productively over the last 10 years to generate revenue? Isn't this the missing catch in this process? Because if you look at it, you constructed the Chinese harbor in Hambantota at $1.2 billion and sold it $1 billion. And there also we had a negative impact of $200 million. Whether or not any government has taken that money, that's a big question mark. But we constructed the Hambantota port with $1.2 billion. We sold it back to the Chinese for 99 years for $1 billion. They have not even paid us the actual value of that port at the end of the day.
Yeah, maybe the actual value may be the 1,000 US dollar million, but 200 million you have to find where it has gone. But I think it is very clear that we have borrowed and we have invested in assets which do not provide us the return that we expected, at least expected in the investment appraisal, the documents. I think it is very clear that that is well documented and well discussed. And in addition, I think the Auditor General mentioned, I think in one of his report he mentioned that if you look at the amount that we have borrowed and the assets that we have built up, there is a gap. That means we do not have assets to the value of what we have borrowed. I think it is very clear that is why in particular we have not invested in areas which provide us the capacities to repay the debts in enhancing our exports, both services as well as the goods. That is why at the moment we have difficulties. I think what you have cited, the Lotus Tower and Hambantota port, and then you have the convention center, and all these things are well documented, well discussed. Those are non-productive assets. And now what is required, I think just mentioned now, Dr. Rajapathiran also mentioned now, what we requested, what we need reforms. Now you see that how the state-owned enterprises are running, and one asking the dollar from the other for the payment now at a crisis of this nature. But these are the entities which actually make huge losses, and at the end of the day to a burden to the public, the government expenditure. So unless you address, unless you reforms those entities, we are again and again in the same, trouble. Now these are the reforms what we ask. Unless you undertake such reforms, we cannot expect that we can, end up the present crisis, and in a sustainable manner we can overcome the debt issue.
Right.
Now you could see now again and again we are going to borrow. Now we ask for the soft facilities and other
very short term,
facilities,
right?
short term. But again we have to go for a long term borrowing from various sources. Now,
and when that time comes, this government will not probably be in power also.
Yeah, that may be, but we do not know. But whoever the
power
in the government, at the end of the day, people who need to suffer. No?
Yeah, my point is, Dr. Dilsingh, at the end of the day, we have to face the brunt. We have to pay these debts because no government which comes into power will pay these debts.
We have to pay the right now. We are paying the cost. No? So this is what we are paying. No, the shortage of goods and the other various other situations. Now we pay the cost at the end of the day.
Because the president during his recent statement said that Karuna Karunavamai, he will do it by hook or by crook. So he will do it.
But what we need is, we need a plan or the program how he is going to do.
Yeah.
That is what is required. Now one can say that within next 3 years time we will get back the economy to the previous status and develop it further, but one can say that, but we need a plan. We need to know how he is going to do it.
Yeah, Dr.
And through which means.
Yeah, Dr. Rajbhadran, what the president probably doesn't realize is that winning a war and governing a country is two different things, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
And
but also I question that advisors around the presidents, or not only this president, others, whatever advice they give, because you can't expect a person who is elected who may not be studied economics, so must rely on a group of people who can give him good advice and develop that program. You can't expect him to know it, and it is not expected of him. It is the people around. They are Vietmaga people. What are they doing? What did the secretary to the president do? I mean, so we had to sit down and get people together and sit around the table.
President's secretary was not part of the Vietmaga program.
Who?
President's secretary was not part of the Vietmaga program.
Well, that's the question. Why is that?
Dr. Jayasundara.
Yeah, he should have been.
He's also been shown the door apparently.
Yeah, well, he had been there for a long time.
And that is why the door has been shown to him.
You
are very careful, Dr. Rajbhadran.
No. I mean, he's a friend. I mean, we worked in Central Bank together. So he should have been in that group.
Anyway, so Dr. Biresha, what is the message you have for foreign remittances to come into the country? What is the message you have for the migrant workers? Now, you said initially that you have to be a real patriot to send money to Sri Lanka through formal channels at 202 or 203 and not have the 240 rupees that they can get from the informal channels, right, Dr. Biresha?
Yes.
Yeah, so what is the message you have? Because nowadays you can't find any true patriots. Yeah.
So
nowadays you can't find any patriots in the country.
So then I should tell them, don't look at the other side, just look at the formal rate and think of it as the only existing rate and send, but that is not going to work, so I won't say that.
So in that event, what is your message for the government or the central bank? Now there is no message that you can give the migrant workers because they would always go for a higher return.
Yes.
So what is the message you have for the
decision makers have to understand that migrants are very very knowledgeable than they think. Just because there is something imposed, they're not going to just follow it. They will do their research. They know where they can get more money, where the costs are low, where the returns are high. So take these facts into consideration and don't think that migrants will be carried away by 2 rupees, offering 2 rupees or 10 rupees. If you want to make an impact, you have to give a significant marginal difference to the incentive. Just, If somebody is anyway sending home money, the 2 rupees doesn't matter. But if you want to attract a new amount of money, it has to be meaningful, something that matters to the person so that he will want to
when you
make
say
a decision.
Meaningful, Dr. Bilisha, what do you mean by that? Because Dr. Rajapatran earlier said that you can't have 2 rates. It has to be 1 rate right throughout because of economic management. So what do you mean by that?
So one thing is, now the exchange rate is not the only way that you can make these attractions. No. Right. There are other things that you could do. You can give other incentives, maybe loan schemes, or right now if a migrant worker, no matter how much he has sent money previously, if you go, he will be given the same housing loan in most places. He doesn't get a different rate. So there are ways you can give many other incentives so that, okay, if you send 12 months in a row, a significant amount of X amount of remittances, you are eligible for a whatever better rate in a loan or something like that. So none of those things are working right now. So then there is no catch, no attraction of that matter. Exchange rate is not all.
You have had constant touch with the migrant workers. You said that you even followed Twitter messages by migrant workers on the remittances that they're sending to Sri Lanka. When you speak to them now, what is the sentiment that they have? Do they have anger towards the governor of the central bank or even the government in power? Do they show agitation for the ways in which how things are governed in the country? What sort of sentiments do they have?
Yes, recently I had a couple of focus group discussions with returned high-skilled workers, returned low-skilled workers, and overseas Sri Lankans who are overseas also. One common theme that I came across was that they were not happy with how they were treated, especially in terms of the remittances. Now, in this high-skilled group, they were very, very angry, would be the word to say, that they could not access their money that they have sent back, and suddenly it was converted or it was blocked. And so now to bring out one example, one family, they have been working there for a long time. They were laid off, very high scale, both husband and wife, they've come down, but now their daughter is studying. So they want to send the tuition fee for the student, and there is an issue in sending it out. And then there was another family where they were trying to put the student, their daughter, son or daughter, I don't know, into one of the local higher education institutes, and that institution wants in US dollars. And now they have dollars. Now these people were very angry because they say, we are not asking for money from anybody else. We have our money, we have our savings, but I can't spend it to my own daughter's education. What am I as a parent? So then they feel very let down. So there has to be mechanisms, especially the way this recent circular about converting of the export earnings and then expanding to service sector earnings, and this unclearness about how do you distinguish service earnings from remittances, and that created a lot of issues in not having access to their own money.
Dr. Bilisha, now we're talking about expat workers who are going overseas and sending money. What is the danger that Sri Lanka possesses at this very moment of time, that people would actually migrate to other countries looking for citizenship, and brain drain could happen, and they might go overseas and start their careers and opportunities from that point onwards? There is a danger on that respect as well, isn't it?
There is a demand to go overseas, but I am always thinking that there is 2 sides to the story, as you said. So brain drain, there will be another circular way of other things coming in, so we can have remittances or social remittances, but it all depends on how we manage them. They can get upset with the situation in the country and go, but we should have a mechanism like India does a real good job of keeping in touch with the overseas Indians and keeping them connected to the economy and benefiting them back into the economy. Our only way is we just want their remittances back.
Because we
don't expand beyond that.
We have learned lessons with difficulty. I can tell you the 1983 riots that took place, the Black July riots that took place when J.R. Jayawardena was in power as the president of the country. A lot of Tamils left the country and sought residency in countries like Canada, Switzerland, Norway, so on and so forth. And then right after the end of the war, I recollect the government in power at that time, Basil Rajapaksa, who was the Minister of Economic Development, requested the Tamil diaspora to come to Sri Lanka and invest money. But they didn't do that. Do you think that we have such a danger right now because of sheer economic mismanagement of the government?
No, I think that Tamil diaspora has a total different sentiment, and the people who are leaving now or might leave now has a different feeling towards the country.
Fed up. If you look at go to the immigration or the immigration officers during the last few months, there were queues.
I don't believe that. I have seen the queues. You know why? Because they've been closed for a long time. So they couldn't issue the passports for one thing. And the other thing, on the dates they're open, they say they put many of these government institutions, they put a big poster saying there was a COVID patient yesterday among the staff, so we can't serve you, don't come inside. You just can't hand in a letter, you can't check on the status. So then there is a backlog for other reasons. So the lines are queuing up for that, I suppose. There is a small segment wanting to go overseas also, but these lines that we saw is not really only because of that.
That's also yes, part of the opposition.
Opposition
has done, because the government has a tendency of blaming the opposition these days for everything.
Can I give an example of a very good place?
Yes.
This happened. I don't know whether you have followed. When in 2003 I worked on Nepal. I was invited to come and lead a group in Nepal, and their remittance was 9% of GDP, right? 9% of GDP, and we also did in that mission income distribution. So closely correlated. When they gave the numbers, I said, I don't believe this number. This can't happen so fast. You know, this not. No, we are going to do the numbers again. I showed them. So people who were abroad, they brought a lot of money and built a lot of houses. They created assets that they really needed. 9% of the GDP. Income, 9% income came from remittances.
Now it's 27%.
Yeah, now it's 27%. This is 2003, right? But the government didn't interfere. There were some people who were offering, actually, former public officials said, we'll give you a loan. You go and take it and find the job and pay us in installments. We'll charge you 4-5%, which is a good rate at that time. And everything worked. I hope it still works. No, 27%.
It's 27% of the GDP.
Now, since you were talking about something that happened in Nepal, I just want to draw your attention to a report that was published by the World Bank last week, where they published the economic growths that they forecast for South Asian countries. And Sri Lanka is the lowest, 2.1%.
Yeah.
And the highest is Maldives with 11%.
Yeah.
What are the lessons that we can learn from countries like Maldives? Because if you can see, Bangladesh has a forecast of 6.4%, then India 8.3%, so even Nepal 3.9%. But Sri Lanka is right there at 2%. What are the lessons that we can learn?
I only know, I worked for that organization for 30 years, right? So I know that they would have done a lot of work to do this. So I am pretty sure that they did a lot of work in order to get those numbers, because they'll be questioned at the different level by the board and the department, the people in charge. So I believe those numbers, because that's the best you can get in the world, actually.
You don't believe the numbers of the central bank?
Sorry?
You don't believe the numbers of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka?
No, I also worked there for 10 years. And I can swear by that time, absolutely swear.
At that time, not now.
So I'm not in touch now, I can't pass judgment by how it is.
Now the numbers are cooked up.
I'm not sure about that.
Right, but that's what your impression is articulating, Dr.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I don't know what is
your impression, the look, the
no,
gestures.
I don't know how you read my impression.
Right. So we're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's a final round. Couldn't all this be a foreign conspiracy, Dr. Rajapathy?
People like to find something like that, right? They are trying to manufacture some conspiracy.
Dr. Dunasinghe, can't all this be a part of conspiracy?
Yes, I wanted to make one comment regarding this remittance.
Yeah.
That is now, if you look at those who have migrated, especially worker migrant, actually they have gone after sometimes selling their house or selling their lands or mortgaging or through borrowing money and through various means. Okay, now what they really want to get the maximum out of what they earn. Now offering 202 at a time that when the outside market you have 240 or 250 per dollar, I think it really encourage workers to send money through various informal channels, and from the government government side it is also not fair for them to either to threaten or force them to use the formal channel at a time that they can get real value of their what they send.
Better return.
And if you look at when their families buy certain things, now all of the prices have gone up. They have to pay higher prices. What has happened is now when you create a one distortion in the economy, that will create another 1,000, and you need to thousands of other policies to fix them out. Now I think this thing, it is very important government understand from the very beginning. This government has implemented some unscientific solution to the problem. Start with the COVID, then the agriculture, and now even the economy. Okay, they have this Viatmaga and all, but if you look at the solution with which they come up, all are unscientific. Okay, that is why we have ended up with this situation. I think at least at this stage, it is important to understand the real issue and come up with the solution which are based on the what we call evidence based policy making. There are a lot of evidence outside. It is not the first time that a country faced with the crisis of this nature in the world, and so you have to learn from the other countries and fix the problem rather than saying that we will do somehow and we have money and we will build a reserve to this point or that point. I think it is not what we need, because just building up reserve won't solve the present economic crisis. It is very clear.
This word scientific, Dr. Dunasinghe, if you may recollect right, it really started with the 2015 Maithripala Sirisena and Ranil Wickremesinghe administration. They said that we will appoint scientifically ministries, and you know how they paired ministries, Ministry of Higher Education with Ministry of Highways. So not only this government in power, even the previous government in power also did a lot of unscientific things during their time in power. So we're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, Dr. Rajapathy, you want to add anything to that?
No, I was thinking about this highways and higher education.
Yeah.
Logical, right? Both are using high.
No, both are on the street.
both are on the streets. That's of course right, Dr. Bilish. Anyway, we're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we're in discussion with Dr. Sarath Rajapathy, Dr. Priyanka Dinasinghe, Dr. Bilisha Veeraratna, as well as Daniel Alphonsus. We will come back after the short commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.
One disinfectant to keep your hands, home surfaces, electronic devices and personal belongings safe from bacteria, virus and fungi. Sri Lanka's first SLS certified disinfectant, now with lemon fresh and ice pine fresh fragrances. Sun all-purpose disinfectant spray.
COVID-19 සඳහා ආරක්ෂිත පියවර. ජනයා වැඩි වශයෙන් සිටින ස්ථානයන්හි ගැවසීම මගහරින්න. රෝගය ආසාදිත පුද්ගලයන් හමුවීමට නොයන්න. මුහුණ, මුඛය, නාසය සහ ඇස් ඇල්ලීමෙන් වළකින්න. අනවශ්‍ය ගමන් බිමන් යෑමෙන් වළකින්න. මුඛාවරණය ඉදිරිපස ඇල්ලීමෙන් වළකින්න.
Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We are in the final round. No questions will be posed from any of the panelists now. They could sum up and wrap up and rebut the points of the other speakers and bring forth their way forward for Sri Lanka. I start off the final round with Dr. Priyanka Dunasinghe, Senior Lecturer of Economics, University of Colombo.
Yeah, basically, I think what I have to say is that the current economic situation require some economic reforms targeting the loan, what we call structural weaknesses in the economy. Even though we will manage the present economic, whatever the crisis in the short run in terms of, if we summarize it to the paying back the loans, we will not get out of the economic stalemate unless we come up with the reforms in the area of promoting exports and reforming the public sector, as well as attracting investors, both domestic and the foreign investors, to invest in areas such as the port city and the other areas. So to achieve those, I think government must come up with the economic program, which now I think they could focus more on that, since we see some sort of we can say that this pandemic is somewhat closer to the end, as what we can see. So with that will provide a, I think, opportunity for the government, and also from the other side, I think there is a very good understanding among the public, among the business people, or even among the investors, and even among the policy makers, the structural weaknesses in the economy at the moment. And this will provide a space for the government to introduce reforms, including the tax reforms or expenditure cuts, or even the privatization or privatization of those state-owned enterprises. So I think it is important to take this opportunity and introduce required reforms. If you do not do that, what happens is we will not be able to take the economy out of the crisis in the medium to long term. I think it is time to act now rather than talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dunasinghe, Senior Lecturer of Economics, University of Colombo. I now move my attention to Daniel Alphonsus, former advisor to the Ministry of Finance.
The spiraling inflation, shortages of essential goods including gas, the unavailability of foreign currency, the inability to remit monies overseas, the downgrading of Sri Lanka's ratings by multiple rating agencies, and the temporary closure of the fuel refinery at Sapugeskanda is part of a long list of items that the Bar Association of Sri Lanka has identified as major crises that are existing in the country today. That list goes on and on. The end of the war should have heralded the end of all of this for good, but it hasn't. And other developing countries haven't experienced this during COVID. Global supply chains have actually worked remarkably well. There have been no food shortages, no power cuts. None of these are across the developing world. This is something that is specific to Sri Lanka. And in this context, I think there's three main things to keep in mind. The first is that the root of all these crises is a sovereign debt crisis, that we've borrowed too much, we've paid too high interest rates, we've spent it on wasteful infrastructure and a bloated public sector, and now we are going to have to pay the price. And the crisis that we're facing today is not a liquidity crisis. It's a solvency crisis. By that we mean that our debt is unsustainable. We will be unable to repay our debts even if we have short-term cash flow things that emerge, like swaps and so on and so forth. Now, to get out of this, all routes involve pain. Pain is unavoidable. It's going to be there. The next few years are going to be very difficult. But the sooner we get to the corrective action, the sooner we stop denying that we have a problem, the sooner we start accepting it and working towards getting out of it, the sooner we'll be out. So in that context, I think a preemptive restructuring is the need of the hour. And then finally, along with that, will involve structural reform. Increasing government revenue, particularly through direct taxation. Rationalizing expenditure. We have a huge amount of waste in public expenditure. And then the productivity reforms that are critical for growth. And then just one final point, as a result of this conversation that we've had today, is you can see that as a result of this crisis, we have laid distortion upon distortion on the economy. We need to dismantle this wholesale and start from very basic principles where we say we acknowledge that supply and demand exist, and we allow markets to function effectively and prevent them from either government capture or from crony capital capture.
Right, thank you very much, Daniel Alphonsus, former advisor to the Ministry of Finance. Dr. Bilisha Veeratna, Research Fellow, Institute of Policy Studies.
I think all our remaining speakers have very eloquently stated about what to do about the economy. So, but one thing I would like to say about the overall economy is this is the time to focus on productivity, where the sectors or the people who are producing things, support them right now, and they can kind of have that multiply effect and do some productive contribution to the economy right now, because we see the farmers are struggling. There are so many small scale people who are suffering. If we give them the right support, I think that is one place where we could also start. Then coming back to my area of migrant workers, I think we have been relying on migrant workers and their remittances for years and years, and when the time came to show our gratitude to them, I think we failed them. We should have done better to them. We know, as we've understood, many came back. Some came back without money, some came back with money, but both groups are struggling to spend. Some have money, but they can't spend their foreign currency, and some of these returned migrant workers, maybe the savings that they have are their retirement savings, and if it is not properly communicated how it is handled, or if it is suddenly seized or suddenly converted into rupees, they are suddenly let down grand scale, because that is how they plan to spend for their children's education or to live until they grow old, because they don't have a pension scheme, they don't have a alternative retirement plan. So this is the time we should have taken care of them, had a clear system of communication of saying, okay, you send this, we will look after you in this manner. That taking care of those who came back is also very slow. With the reintegration of them, some are trying to find employment. That might be hard in the economy. But then some people who have the money, maybe investing it or accessing, that sort of other dimensions of reintegration was also a kind of slow. So those things also have to catch on if we are to continue to rely on migrant worker remittances and attract it in future, because right now there is a trend of it going elsewhere or coming through the informal channels. So if we want to capitalize on this very valuable source of migrant workers, we have to give them back and take care of them properly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bilisha. Last but not all the least, Dr. Sarath Rajapatrana, Chair, Academic Programs at Lukhara Institute.
So we have had a very interesting discussion. I think all the points that we need to make, we have made. So I'll add a couple of things. I just begin by saying, you know, we have We have a tough situation, but I have seen countries coming out of this type of situation before. And what does it need? It needs a committed leadership who understand what is at stake. A summary of what we discussed would be a very good starting point for them to go ahead. One. Two is that I think in this reform program that I have witnessed close at hand, we start with macroeconomics, because if macroeconomics goes wrong, the whole thing breaks down. So start with macroeconomics, meaning here in our case, reduce the fiscal deficit. Although the government says 5% or 8% something, others are saying it's close to 15%. We can't afford to have that. Okay, we can't afford to have that type of a huge fiscal deficit. So then after that, we have to make sure that we rationalize the system. We can go back, as I said before, we can go back to reconstitute the VAT and also to, in the medium term, try to go to reverse the ratio, tax ratio that we are collecting 80% of taxes to indirect taxes is very unfair, because it treats people who are very rich and people who are poor in the same way. That's not a good system, so we have to get rid of that. But we have been talking about this for a long time. But here's a chance that when we have this opportunity, when things are turning a bit sour, it's a time for us to wake our people up and say, these are things we have to do. So I go to the incentive reforms, which I think everybody calls structural reforms. Work on trade, work on regulation, work on institutions. One reason why this public enterprise is there, because they have been, it's a sort of a result of the patronage to political parties. So when somebody ran to contest the election and lost it, I appointed promptly as a chairman of some public enterprises. I mean, they have no idea to run this, and other people who work for them don't respect them. They know how they came there. So we have to really think that 11% of GDP we are handling, and you can imagine productivity is very, very low there. Then my last one is agriculture. We still have this very difficult situation. I'm not talking about the banning chemicals, but long-term thing is that we have about 27% of our population in agriculture. The addition to come from agriculture is only 7%. So right there we have a huge production issue. It's not competitive also, and we give lot of subsidies, guaranteed prices, sometimes free fertilizers, sometimes the seeds and things. I think should be done, but we have to be careful about how we are going to get agriculture moving again, and that would be a very interesting, good thing to do to help the rural folks also.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajapathan. When you say free fertilizer, not anymore. Only for organic fertilizer, it's being provided at a concession.
To me, fertilizer.
And guaranteed prices. Dr. Rajapathan, have you visited the market recently? Then you would notice that the guaranteed prices are no more in the Sri Lankan market. So
no, guaranteed prices for the farmers.
Farmers, the producer.
Yeah, producer. Yeah.
Right, but if you look at the prices now, Dr. Rajapathan, it's not the government who's handling the governance, it's the mill owners and all the others who are handling the governance structure.
The government can't escape the blame.
Anyway, thank you very much. Dr. Sarath Rajapathan, Chair of the Academic Programs at Vikarta Institute, Dr. Bilisha Veeratna, Research Fellow, Institute of Policy Studies, Dr. Priyanka Dunusinghe, Senior Lecturer of Economics, University of Colombo, as well as Daniel Alphonsus, former advisor to the Ministry of Finance, for joining us this evening on the show. Thank you very much, Shehan. Thank you very much, Hassan, for joining us on the show tonight. It was a pleasure having you both. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. Can we do it? Only time will tell. Take care and good night.
Good night.
You